Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my greedy uncle tried to steal my inheritance after my mother passed away. Here is how I taught him a lesson. The first one starts like this. When I was 24, my mother died quite suddenly in her sleep, which came as a major shock to everyone in the family. I was very close with my mother, and as I'm an only child, she had no other children to have that sort of bond with. My dad was not around much, so it seemed like it was just me and mom against the world some days. I'm sure you can understand that when she died, it took a major toll on me. I had moved out a year prior, but decided to come home for a couple of months as I felt I would feel closer to my mom if I was back in the home I grew up in. My father found it comforting that I was there too. It was written as clear as day on his face that her death hit him hard. After months of putting it off, we eventually went to get her will read out to us. My dad, for the most part, knew what she had written as they had obviously discussed it, but he still felt as though he should hear it anyway. So, to cut a long story short, she had left me pretty much everything she owned. Which I'm realizing is more than I expected. She left me $100,000, her jewelry collection, which was worth at least another $10,000, and the deeds to the house. We were told as we left that all of the documents would be sent over in the next couple of days. I put the address of my childhood home as I knew I would still be there by the time they arrived. My uncle, my mother's brother, decided to come and stay with us for a bit too. Me and my dad found this odd as he had only ever made an appearance in the last 24 years a couple of times. We shook it off, assuming he was simply mourning. I was unable to take much time off work, so I was away quite often, same with my father. Roughly 2 weeks after the visit, we took to the will attorney. The documents that were supposed to have been delivered had not been, which by this point we found odd. So we decided to ring the attorney, who told us that they shipped them the day after we had left and that on the tracking information it states that they had been delivered. Obviously, as we knew we hadn't gotten them, this sent us both into a bit of a panic. My uncle swore at the time that they had not arrived while we were out, and if they did, he would tell us immediately. One afternoon, he randomly left in the middle of the day without any warning and didn't come back. I guess that his stay was over. Another week passed and still no documents were posted through the door. We wondered if maybe they were delivered to the neighbors instead, but they said they didn't receive anything either. The following day there was a knock at the door at around 5 AM, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Who would call around at this hour? "I'm here to deliver an eviction notice," a man said at the door, handing me a flyer with eviction written across the top in red. I stared at the man who was wearing a police uniform in disbelief as he started to walk away. "Wait, this makes no sense. I own this house. My mother passed it down to me," I replied frantically, rushing out the door to catch up with the man. "Listen, I don't know all of the fine details, but this house was passed down to someone and they have put in the eviction notice." The officer shrugged and continued walking away. I ran back inside and went straight over to my dad, who had woken up after hearing the door. I showed him the letter and together we called the number on the paper. They told us that the house was now under the ownership of Martin Smith. We were both silent for so long that they ended up hanging up. Martin Smith was the name of my uncle. I can't explain the fury that went through my veins after getting that news. I knew immediately that he had done something foul and this was no mistake. "What have you done?" I shouted down the phone after ringing my uncle. "What do you mean?" he replied, yawning as I must have woken him up. "Why am I being evicted from my own home, and why am I being told that it's you who owns it?" I continued. "Because your mother passed it down to me, obviously. Listen, don't be too offended that she cared more for me than you. I got the letter a few weeks ago," he replied, a smirk present in his voice. "You were here 2 weeks ago," I responded, putting the pieces together in my mind. He then hung up the phone, clearly realizing that he had given away more than he should have. After calling up my work and telling them I wouldn't be coming in today, I quickly got dressed and drove down to the will attorney's office. "I can pull up the copies on my screen if you would like," the attorney said after I explained the situation. The documents on the screen seemed perfectly fine. My name was clearly present at the bottom of each of them as the only recipient. "Is there any way of getting another set of documents sent to the address?" I asked hopefully. "Unfortunately not. These are just copies. There's only one original copy of each. I can email you these if that helps." She responded, a sincere look on her face. I nodded, thanked her and went on my way. I sat in my car for a minute contemplating what my next move could be. I decided to go to the police station to see if they could help me. They were surprisingly more helpful than I had imagined they would be, saying that they would be able to investigate right away because government documentation was involved. 2 officers got into one of the police cars and followed me as I drove to my uncle's house. "Sir, we've been informed that you have illegally taken ownership of your niece's house. Please, may we see the deeds you have to the location?" One of the officers spoke once my uncle had opened his door. After rooting around in his house for a while, my uncle came back with some papers in hand and handed them to the officer. "Here, as you can see, my name is plainly written underneath my niece's. She signed the deeds over to me." It didn't take him long to confirm that it was indeed a forged document. My uncle kept trying to plead his case, saying that I had bribed them to say that we had an agreement. The police, unfazed by this, asked to see his most recent bank statement, as I had told them about the money that he also could have stolen. "Of course, one moment," my uncle said, a smile on his face. We listened as he shut the door and then began shuffling around in his house. After a couple of minutes, we heard the back gate open and the officers quickly ran around and started chasing him as he attempted to make a run for it. "You'll never catch me," he screamed as he darted away, quickly eating his words as he face-planted directly into a pile of mud mere moments later. I waited as they handcuffed him and brought him back to the house, pushing him against their car to search him. "Please stop doing this. I haven't done anything wrong." "Tell them," Martin screeched, staring at me and pleading for me to help his case. "My mother would be ashamed of you," I spat back, watching as he was shoved into the car. One of the officers went into the house and recovered all of the documents for the deeds, the money and the jewelry. They told me that they would hang on to them until everything is cleared by a supervisor, after which I'd be able to come and pick up the documents in person this time and claim my rightful inherited assets. I ended up having to go to court over it, which was an easy yet frustrating case to win. Turns out my uncle had done this to his brother as well when their grandma passed away. With both cases of forgery, he was sent to jail with a sentence of 10 years. Even better yet, I was able to sue him for $50,000 for emotional stress, which may seem extreme, but I'm sure you can all agree is well deserved. And yeah, ripe stars, time and time again, these big inheritances bring out the worst in people, and it is sometimes possible that family members actually turn into your worst enemies, like in this case. Hopefully that won't happen in your family. Either way, let's continue with the next story. This one is a revenge story. A few years ago, I was looking for a BotCon exclusive shattered glass Rodimus, which apparently is some kind of expensive transformer figure. Prices on eBay were too damn high, so I turned to the Junkion exchange on tfw2005.com. I've bought and sold items there several times and have gotten great deals. I put out a post of what I was looking to buy and waited. The next day I got a message from a user I refer to as Craplord or SL for short. SL said he had a shattered glass Rodimus and said he would sell it for $200. That was at least half of what they went for on eBay at the time, so I accepted and sent the money via PayPal as a gift. Some of the balance was paid via my PayPal balance and the majority of my credit card. $50 from PayPal and $150 from the credit card. This detail is important later. In short, SL lied. He never had the figure I wanted and scammed me out of $200. I went to the forums calling this guy out and asked for help from the mods over there. After doing so, I called PayPal. Sadly, since the payment was sent as a gift, there was nothing they could do to refund me. However, the rep told me since about $150 was paid from my credit card, I can file a claim with them. He told me what department to call, who to talk to, and what sort of claim to file. Awesome. He also put a note on Craplord's account to be investigated. After calling my credit card company, someone on the forums emailed me saying they knew this seller, this scammer, and gave me his contact details. Normally, I don't support doxing someone, but he is a thief. F him. I called SL and left a voicemail and text. He later called me and tried to play dumb. Then he said his forum account and his PayPal were hacked. Really? What a coincidence. I told him he should refund my money or I would call his local police and have them sort this out. He caved after that and gave me a sob story how he needed the money to buy his daughter a Christmas gift. I did not buy the story and threatened legal action. He had to have his girlfriend send my money back through her PayPal account since his one ended up getting locked due to all this nonsense. So I got my PayPal balance of $50 from him and my bank credited me $150. So then I got my $200 back. So here's the kicker. I never told him I filed a claim against him with my credit card company. Keep in mind he only sent me $50 back for PayPal. My CC company refunded me the $150, $200 total. So that meant they had his info too and they would come after him to recoup their costs. A week later, my bank called me and told me this seller was claiming I breached PayPal's terms of service and blah blah blah. I called the guy again and told him if he lied again, I would call the cops. An hour later, my bank said everything was resolved and to have a nice day. And the next one is titled Tenant Revenge. A couple of months ago, while away from my apartment, I got a phone call from the leasing office asking if I was inside my apartment. I said no, and they said that I needed to stay away from the apartment until they called to let me know it was safe to go back. Naturally worried, I asked why. They said that a man had broken into the building's attic and had managed to use the attic access in my apartment to enter into my apartment and was now barricaded inside. After about a 6-hour standoff, the police kicked open my front door and pulled the guy out. As a temp fix for the door, the maintenance put a new strike plate on the remaining splintered door frame so that I could at least close it. Thinking they would return the next day to complete the repair, I was of course cool with this. Now, the temporary strike plate only allowed me to close my door but wasn't actually securing it. The broken door frame that it was screwed to made it so that a little bit of weight applied to my door would rip the whole thing apart again and allow easy access to my apartment. Obviously not secured or a long-term solution. After calling and talking to the management in person just about every other day for 4 weeks without anyone coming to fix my door, I decided that enough was enough. I needed a secure door for my apartment. The office kept saying, "We are working on it," without any actual repairs attempted. So I decided to my local news station, which has a consumer report investigative team. This same news station had reported on the initial incident the month prior and were very willing to do the follow-up story. They came out, took some video and did an interview with me. They then tried talking to the management but ended up getting kicked off the property. They put together a beautiful segment for their nightly news that perfectly displayed the incompetency of this leasing company. Watching it was a very beautiful moment of revenge for me. The next day, the entire maintenance crew was at my apartment and replaced the whole door and frame with a shiny new one. And the next one is an Am I the Jerk story. So we had a staycation this weekend. We visited a local luxury resort and parked our car with the valet. Upon departure, we found that items were missing. We reported it to the valet and after investigating with the police, they found that some teens were going through the parking lot removing items from cars the valet left unlocked. Police reports were filed and the people were located and they happened to be guests at the hotel with their family. We were asked to meet with the mother at 7 p.m. to retrieve our items. Let me say that we are not rich, we work hard, we have 3 kids, we work days, nights, weekends to be okay and get ahead. This day/night was some time for our family to enjoy themselves before we headed back to weeks of non-stop work. Anyways, the mother arrives and sends her son with the security to apologize. I stated I didn't want an apology, I just want my things. Upon reviewing the bag I was handed, it was incomplete and what there was damaged. It was sunglasses, Ray-Bans to be specific, a matching pair that I got my husband and I for Christmas. They were in great condition in their case in the car. We literally used them in the car and put them back. We are weird like that. Both the mom and son become aggressive, stating that's all he took and now we got it back so they are done. No. Did I mention that we worked really hard? Your kid stole from me. She insulted me, called us bad people in front of my kids, and she tried to use the "you're a mother" card. Yes, I'm a mother, but I would sell my kid's stuff if he stole from you, or I would make his 17-year-old ass work to pay it off. She kept stating that I was incorrectly stating the value, so I pulled out the receipt. Don't you love how they email those things now? In the end, we left and will proceed with trying to go through court. The entitlement on the woman and her 17-year-old grown-ass son was too much for me. I don't accept your apology. You cannot insult and berate someone and demand that I accept your apology without a good faith effort to replace what was lost. I was a child, I crashed, my dad paid, as parents we're responsible for our children's actions and teaching them sorry doesn't cut it. So Reddit, am I the a-hole here? Adding, the mother kept stating that money is not an issue, she is a lawyer. So it's not a situation where they couldn't just afford to make it right, she just felt she didn't need to. And here, Ripe Stars, let me know what you think about this story in the comments. Do you think that OP is the a-hole here or not? I would with 100% confidence say that OP is clearly not the a-hole, and absolutely this Karen lawyer is the massive a-hole in the story. In addition, her son kind of is as well. He is 17 years old, he needs to take responsibility for his behavior. He's not really a kid anymore. At 17 years old, you clearly know what you are doing when you steal someone's items. Either way, people in the comments said, he is 17 and did something illegal. He is responsible for his actions and replacing what he took. Comment number 2, oh, those sunglasses are not that expensive, she says. Here is a copy of the receipt, you say. Damn, see her in court. You're gonna nail her and her entitled thieving little spawn. Update to the story, this is on AITA because I've had an intrinsic debate. Am I the a-hole for wanting the book thrown at him? For going after a reimbursement or some sort of punishment? Is he just a kid? Am I being petty? As someone who is empathetic to others, I've been unsure of my position. However, many of you have made me feel as I am not the a-hole. So thank you. Police are dragging their feet and stating that meeting with the family at the behest of the hotel has basically voided our claim to a burglary. The state's attorney office stated that it's not true. Let's see if the police and state attorney can get it together. Unfortunately, Ripe stars, from what I saw, there is no further update to the story. However, if I find anything, I will of course let you know. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Neighbor trespassed on my land and called the cops to kick me out of my own property. This is a story from a few years ago and it is easily one of my favorite party stories to tell when we get into the subject of entitled douchebags, especially neighbor douchebags. About 7 years ago, when I was still a teenager, my dad and I had to deal with the most entitled neighbor ever. Let me start off by explaining that my parents owned a very large plot of land, some for farming and some was just unoccupied but was kept mowed and cleared of bush. All in all, I think that the property was about 112 acres. Every so often, my father would have to patrol the property looking for evidence of trespassing and dumping, which seemed to happen quite often. Eventually, he was able to fence and gate off the entire 112 acres, but that did not seem to stop people from cutting through or filling in the ditches that surrounded the land just so they could have access to my family's property. My father put no trespassing signs everywhere, and yet it did not change anything. There was always evidence of someone coming onto our land, even seeing tire marks from ATVs and quad bikes. Another important part of the story is that my dad was a big gun buff. He had been since he was a kid, always collecting different kinds, whether it is rifles, pistols, shotguns, you name it. Because of that, I became interested in learning about guns too. We would spend hours working on target practice out in the fields, and once I got older, that turned into hunting. As the different hunting seasons would come about, my father and I would venture deep into the property and post up, watching for whatever critters we were hunting at the time. Sometimes we would even bring our tent and make it a weekend camping excursion. These memories are the ones that I hold dear to my heart, especially now that my father has passed away. And nothing makes me smile more than remembering when my dad shamed our stupid entitled neighbor who thought he had some rights to our land and was a total jerk to us and our dog. So, to set the scene, it is early fall, my father's favorite season, because of the crisp weather and the smell of bug piss in the air. At least that is what he always used to say. My mom liked to tell him it was gross. It's a normal camping and hunting trip like we have taken in the years previously. Me, Dad, and our chocolate Labrador Beau drove far out onto our property, maybe about 1.5 miles in, nestled into this clearing that Dad had specifically made for our tent and fire. We spent the morning setting up our guns and tree stands when we thought we heard an engine out in the distance. Dad could not hear it, so we just carried on with our preparations. After being in our positions for a while, me in the tree stand and Dad in his camouflage cover with Beau next to him, we finally spotted a deer. It's a mature buck with at least 10 points, one that I would be proud to make my first trophy. Let me say that I don't hunt anymore, by the way, but in the state I lived in, there was an abundance of deer, especially on our property. I took aim and fired, shooting it in the shoulder but still missing my mark. So it ran and I shot again. We followed its blood trail for about 20 yards before we found him. The buck was still alive, so my dad ended its suffering swiftly with another gunshot. I felt really badly about this, another reason why I did not turn hunting into a habit. Anyway, only a few minutes later, we could hear the engine sound from earlier quickly approaching. This time Dad heard it too. It was not too long before 2 ATVs pulled up, one with a kid younger than me and another one with who I assumed was his dad. The man was in his late 40s and had a big old beer gut and wore an entire getup of camouflage. His white face was flushed red as he sped up to us aggressively and threw his four-wheeler into park. His approach was a little abrasive and unexpected, startling our dog, who began barking at him. My father approached in a friendly manner, but Bo kept barking. The man on the ATV got off and started screaming at our dog to "shut the F up." Dad shooed the dog back and started speaking with the a-hole. Well, speaking is a little untrue. More like the man immediately jumped down my dad's throat and was accusing him of endangering his son with our gunfire. At first I was very confused because it is our land. And then I realized that this dude is just a jackass. When my father told him that we were shooting into an area that had a dense hillside to the south of it, the guy only laughed and said that it did not matter. He even sounded so smug as to say that we were shooting illegally. I spoke up and said that it was deer season and we had a license, and the guy cut me off, telling me to shut my mouth and let the adults handle the conversation. He told my father, "This is private property and you cannot just come onto it and shoot wherever and whatever you like." Dad was not going to tolerate this man's attitude for much longer, as his neck was turning the red color it always does when he is about to flip his lid. Dad asks, "Did you see the no trespassing signs when you came onto this land?" The man only scoffed and said that he'd been using the land for months and had even created his own little access path onto it. "Did you know that this is our land and not yours?" He then smugly said that he knows the people who own the land and that he has permission to use it, and he is going to call them and the police for our illegal shooting, child endangerment and trespassing. My father welcomed the call to the police and patiently waited for them to arrive. In the meantime, Dad called Mom and had her bring the deed with our property surveyor paperwork before we loaded up the deer into the back of our truck. The stupid entitled dude started taunting my father and I from his seat on his ATV. "Haha, can't wait for the cops to give me that deer you illegally killed." And then he starts telling his son that "this is why you don't take crap from assholes like these guys." What a giant turd of a man, and I feel sorry for that kid too. After about 45 minutes, the cops finally arrived. They genuinely seemed annoyed about having to come all the way out to our place and quickly diverted their annoyance to the correct party. The officer spoke with us first, allowing my father to show him the property paperwork and proof of ownership, even complimenting me on my first deer. 10-point buck for a 15-year-old? That's dang good, kid, he said and patted me on the shoulder. He told my dad and I to sit tight and said that he would have the situation handled quickly. We could hear the a-hole telling the officer about how he knows the person who owns this land and that he had permission to use it. He even went as far as to say that he had cut down trees and filled in a ditch so that he could have an easier route onto our land. When the officer asked him if he knew the name of the person, he had suddenly forgot. Right, because they own the land. The cop pointed at us from over his shoulder, earning a panicked look from the douchebag on the ATV. "Did you come onto the property even after seeing the trespassing signs?" It was pretty obvious from that point that he was in the hot seat. To make the entire situation even better, the officer found other things to charge the man for on top of trespassing. When he asked if the vehicles were registered, the man said no because he thought that they were using private property where that was unnecessary. Needless to say, the dude left with his tail between his legs. Him and his son had to push their ATVs back to their vehicle, and he had to pay the trespassing fines and the fines for not having their vehicles registered. Dad shouted to them as we drove by, "Hey, I would give you a lift, but the deer in my truck bed is taking up all the room." And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, for me it is almost unimaginable how someone can be so entitled to not only trespass on someone else's private property, but then also have the audacity to get the owner, or at least try to get the owner of the property, kicked out of their own land and maybe in trouble with the police. I guess some entitled people just think that the world belongs to them. Either way, if you enjoy the stories about entitled people, then I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we are on our way to 100,000 subscribers.